She must believe I'm oblivious to the missing funds, Donovan Thorne mused, his body sinking into the plush leather of the armchair in his private study. He stared at the ornate plaster ceiling, a glass of amber scotch swirling in his hand. But I'm not, and tonight she will learn a lesson that will remain with her for the rest of her days. The mansion was silent, a profound quiet that felt almost unnatural for a residence as sprawling as the Thorne estate on Chicago's North Shore. Outside, the autumn wind whispered off Lake Michigan, a mournful sound that grand fortunes like his usually managed to keep at bay. Inside, the subtle fragrance of Sabina's perfume clung to the air, a constant, cloying reminder of her presence. She was upstairs, his girlfriend of 2 years, a socialite who had swept into his life and simply decided to stay. She adored the galas, the exotic cars, the flash of cameras. Donovan tolerated her presence, or perhaps he simply tolerated the illusion of not being alone. He placed the now empty tumbler on a coaster, the crystal clinking softly. He rubbed his jaw, his gaze fixed on the heavy steel door of the safe he'd left ajar across the room. His wallet sat on the mahogany coffee table, bulging with $100 bills. Beside it, his platinum watch reflected the warm glow of the desk lamp. The scene was meticulously arranged, a perfect lure. $3,000 had vanished from a drawer in his dressing room the previous week. The amount was trivial. He'd spent more on a single case of wine. But the principle was everything. No one stole from Donovan Thorne, not in his own home. Only 3 members of the staff had routine access to his private suite. Agnes, the aging head housekeeper, who had been with his family for decades, Gideon, his driver of 20 years, and Clara Hayes, the new maid. He had harbored a dislike for her from the moment she arrived. She was too quiet, too meticulous, too self-possessed. Her manners were impeccable, her work was flawless, and her voice was a near whisper. She never accepted tips, never met his gaze directly, and she was the only one whose circumstances suggested a quiet desperation. When Sabina had learned of the missing cash, her laughter had been sharp and dismissive. "Oh, Donnie, darling, you can't possibly think your sweet old housekeeper or that driver who needs a cane to get around could pilfer from you. It's that new girl, the quiet one." Sabina had delivered the verdict with a casual certainty that burrowed into his mind with unsettling ease. He had found himself nodding. Of course, it had to be Clara. Who else could it be? And so he had devised this test. The stage was set, an open safe, a wallet overflowing with cash, a priceless watch, a sleeping titan of industry within arm's reach. Donovan shifted in his chair, loosened the knot of his silk tie, and let his head fall back, feigning the deep slumber of a man exhausted by his own wealth. The leather groaned softly beneath him. From the upper floor he could faintly hear Sabina's tinkling laughter and the distant tinny rhythm of some modern pop song she favored. It felt almost dishonorable, suspecting someone over such a paltry sum, but betrayal in his world rarely announced itself with a thunderclap. It began with whispers, with small transgressions. His father had always said, "A man who ignores the small deceptions is signing up to be the victim of the great ones." Donovan had built his life around that creed, especially since Sabina had moved in, especially since trust had become a commodity he guarded more fiercely than any stock portfolio. Footsteps approached, soft and measured, the sound of someone conditioned to be invisible. The heavy oak door of the study swung open with a barely audible creak. Clara entered, her simple uniform immaculate, her pale blonde hair pulled back in a severe, neat bun. She carried a small tray with cleaning supplies and glanced around the room before making her way toward the towering bookshelves. She either didn't see him or was pretending not to. The lamplight cast her in a soft, ethereal glow, her features delicate and pale. She worked with a methodical grace, dusting the leather-bound volumes, arranging them into perfect symmetrical lines. Donovan watched through barely slitted eyes, Every one of her movements was hushed, practiced, almost reverent. He willed her to make a mistake, to reveal the avarice he was so sure lurked beneath that placid surface. She circled the room, her path finally leading her to the coffee table. The wallet sat there, practically shimmering under the lamp. She paused, but only for a heartbeat. Then she let out a slow, quiet breath and continued wiping the polished wood surface with long, even strokes. Donovan counted the seconds. 10, 20, nothing. Then her eyes fell upon the open safe, the stacks of cash visible within. Now, he thought, a grim satisfaction coiling in his gut. Instead, Clara walked toward his chair. She bent down, her movements fluid, and picked up the cashmere throw that had slipped from his lap onto the floor. With careful fingers, she shook it out, then draped it gently over his chest and legs. Her touch was feather-light, brief, and, strangely, maternal. She stepped back, her gaze lingering on his face. It was a look devoid of calculation or fear. It was simple, human concern. Then, quietly, she crossed to the bookshelf, retrieved the small, worn Bible that had belonged to his mother, and laid it across the wallet and the watch. Her fingers brushed the worn leather cover once. "Some things are best left untouched," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Donovan's pulse gave a sudden, sharp flutter. She turned and exited the room, closing the door as silently as she had entered. For a long moment he remained motionless, his eyes wide open now, staring at the ceiling. The mansion was quiet again, the only sounds the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, and Sabina's faint, oblivious laughter from upstairs. He sat up, the blanket pooling in his lap. The wallet was precisely where he had left it. He opened it. Every bill was accounted for. He let out a single, low, humorless laugh. "Well, Miss Hayes," he muttered to the empty room, "you play your part exceptionally well." He stood, poured himself another scotch, and glanced at the security feed on his phone. The tiny camera, concealed behind a landscape painting, had captured the entire scene. He watched the footage. Her movements were slow, graceful, deliberate. There was no trick, no theft, just that odd, unexpected tenderness, the blanket, the Bible, the whispered admonition. He replayed it twice, then a third time. Upstairs, Sabina's heels clicked across the marble floor of their bedroom. "Donnie," she called out, her voice dripping with impatience. "Are you still hiding in that dusty old room? Come to bed. The night isn't over yet." He switched off the screen and slipped the phone into his pocket. "I'll be right there," he called back. But he didn't move. For the first time that evening, a tiny seed of doubt began to sprout, not about Clara, but about himself, and maybe, somewhere in the recesses of his mind, about the woman laughing upstairs. Donovan did not sleep that night. He lay awake beside Sabina, staring at the ceiling as her expensive perfume clung to the silk pillows like a stain he could never quite scrub away. She was curled on her side, facing away from him, murmuring in her sleep. Her hand rested on the sheets as if it had never held anything heavier than a champagne flute. But Donovan's thoughts were not on Sabina. They were on Clara. That damned blanket, that Bible, and that quiet, resonant voice. Some things are best left untouched. He had watched the security footage 5 more times after Sabina had drifted off to sleep. Every one of Clara's movements had been calm, measured, betraying no hint of suspicion. There were no furtive glances over her shoulder, no hesitation near the safe. There was only a profound stillness, a kind of strength wrapped in silence that he found deeply unsettling. He didn't understand what had gotten under his skin. The next morning Donovan rose early, dressing in tailored trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, before heading downstairs. The estate was unusually quiet. Agnes, the housekeeper, was in the kitchen, humming a tune from an old musical while she polished silver. Gideon was outside, meticulously washing the town car. Clara was nowhere to be seen. He didn't ask after her. It would have seemed too pointed, too eager. Instead, he poured himself a black coffee and stepped out onto the stone terrace, sipping it slowly as steam curled into the cool Chicago air. The ancient oaks at the edge of the property rustled in the breeze, their bare branches stark against the gray morning sky. Eventually he heard footsteps, soft, measured ones. It was Clara carrying a basket of freshly laundered linens, walking past the terrace toward the guest wing. Her eyes were fixed on the path ahead. Donovan cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes." She stopped instantly, her gaze lifting, a flicker of surprise in her pale blue eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne." He studied her. There was no flinch, no sign of guilt, just a quiet respect, perhaps too much of it. "Would you join me for a moment?" Her hesitation was so brief it was almost imperceptible. She placed the basket on a nearby bench and stepped onto the terrace, maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, his voice low. "Yes, sir." His tone dropped further. "Were you aware the safe in the study was left open last night?" Clara blinked once, but her expression remained neutral. "I saw that it was, yes." "And you didn't think to close it?" "I didn't believe it was my place to touch it," she replied evenly. "You appeared to be asleep, and I had no wish to disturb you." "You placed a Bible on top of my wallet." "Yes, sir." "Why?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping for a fraction of a second. "Because sometimes that is the only language people are willing to listen to when words are not enough." Donovan set down his coffee cup. "Are you always so poetic?" Her lips twitched, a phantom of a smile. "Only when I'm tired, sir." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Do you believe I was testing you?" "I made no assumptions, but it did feel like a test. Did that offend you?" "No." Her eyes met his again, clear and direct. "You are not the first person to assume the worst of me before knowing me." The words landed with more force than he'd anticipated. He nodded slowly, watching her with a new intensity. "You may return to your work." "Yes, Mr. Thorne." As she turned to leave, he added, "Clara," she paused, "I am missing $3,000 from my dressing room." She didn't move. "I am sorry to hear that, sir." He waited for more, a denial, a reaction, a plea. But she simply gave a slight nod and walked away, her back straight, never once looking back. Inside, Donovan found Sabina perched on a stool at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. She wore a silk robe that was barely tied closed. "Well," she smirked, not looking up, "did our little Cinderella pass your purity test?" Donovan didn't answer. He opened the refrigerator and poured himself a glass of orange juice. Sabina stretched languidly. "She's too perfect. It's grating." "Lot, you don't know her," Donovan said, his tone sharper than he'd intended. Sabina finally looked up, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Neither do you." He set the glass down with more force than necessary. "I know when someone is lying." "Do you?" she asked, sliding off the stool and moving toward him, her movement sinuous and practiced. "Because you didn't know about me. Not until I wanted you to." Donovan froze. Sabina smiled, a cold, glittering thing. "Relax." "I'm not stealing from you anymore." He stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. "Why are you still here?" She pressed a kiss to his cheek, her lips cool. "Because I like the view, Donnie, and the amenities." By noon, Donovan was back in his office, Clara's file open on his laptop screen. Her employment history was sparse. A nursing assistant in a small town in Indiana, a volunteer at a local clinic. A brief, stark note in her application mentioned the loss of a child, Leo, age 7. No other family was listed. He looked up from the screen and glanced out the window. In the distance, he could see her near the gardens, hanging linens on a clothesline, her sleeves rolled up, the pale autumn sun warming her shoulders. She worked with an intense focus, as if her entire world had shrunk to the task at hand, as if she were actively trying to remain invisible. But Donovan saw her now. He wasn't sure what he was seeing exactly, but it was nothing like what he had expected, and that unsettled him more than he was willing to admit. Donovan paced his office. the large window framing Clara like a moving portrait. Every so often she would pause, lift a crisp white sheet to the breeze, fold it with an economy of motion, and pin it to the line. There was a quiet grace in her rhythm that tugged at something deep within him, something he had long since buried. He hated the feeling. He sat down at his desk and opened a hidden compartment beneath the side panel. Inside lay the small flash drive containing the footage from the previous night. He plugged it into his laptop, replaying the video for what must have been the 7th time. He wasn't doing it because he doubted what he had seen, but because he was beginning to doubt what he had believed. The girl didn't take a thing, but what if that's the trick? What if she knew I was testing her? He paused the video at the exact moment she placed the Bible on his wallet. Her fingers lingered on the worn cover, her expression unreadable. He rewound it again. Downstairs, the front door opened and closed with a decisive click. Sabina's heels echoed across the marble foyer. A few moments later, she appeared in the doorway of his office, a pair of oversized sunglasses perched on her head, holding an iced latte with her usual air of theatrical nonchalance. "Still going through security footage? Really, Donnie?" she asked, taking a loud sip. "You're going to chase this little Maid story until it consumes you." He closed the laptop slowly. "You think I'm obsessed?" "I think," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "that you're bored and searching for something you can control." He offered no response. She tilted her head, her gaze scrutinizing. "Let me guess. Clara passed your little morality trap. Now you're trying to figure out why she passed. You're convinced she must be hiding something. Perhaps she's just a decent person. They still exist, you know." Donovan stood up. "Like you?" Sabina smirked. "No, darling. I never pretended to be." The barb landed like a physical blow, but he let it go. There was no point in arguing anymore. The truth about her petty thefts had been out for months, and still she remained. Still he allowed it. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was the fear that losing her publicly would make him appear weak. Perhaps endings, for him, always came at too high a cost. "I'm heading out," she announced, pushing off the doorframe. "Charity luncheon. Want me to bring you back photos of me feigning concern for the less fortunate?" He didn't answer. She didn't wait for one. When the door closed behind her, Donovan pulled up another document on his laptop, Clara's original application form. There, in careful, neat handwriting, was the field for an emergency contact. It was left blank. He scrolled down. Under the Skills section, she had listed basic first aid, care for delicate fabrics, silent cleaning techniques, and grief support counseling, volunteer role. That last one made him pause. Grief counseling. People didn't list something like that unless it was deeply meaningful, unless it had been earned through experience, not just learned in a course. He opened a new browser tab and began to dig, searching for local clinics in Indiana for volunteer registries. It took him 20 minutes, but he found a reference, a small blog post written 5 years ago by a head nurse named Dana Miller, praising a volunteer named Clara Hayes, who had recently lost her own son and still chose to serve other grieving mothers in the community. Donovan exhaled, the breath catching in his throat. His eyes remained fixed on the name, Leo. There were no photographs, no obituary, no further details. He reached for the phone on his desk, his thumb hovering over the extension for the housekeeper's quarters. He needed to know more, not to accuse Clara, but to understand her. Before he could dial, a soft knock came at the door. "Come in." It was Agnes, the head housekeeper. She was older, proper, with a spine made of steel. "Sir," she said gently, "may I have a word with you?" "Of course, Agnes." She entered, closing the door softly behind her, then approached his desk with a hesitance that signaled trouble. Donovan stood. "Is something wrong?" "It's about Clara," Agnes said. His stomach tensed. "What about her?" She was in the laundry room this morning. I walked in and saw her holding something. It looked like an envelope. When she noticed me, she slipped it into her apron pocket and smiled as if nothing was amiss. Did you see what was inside? No, sir. He ran a hand through his hair. Agnes, do you trust her? I believe she is a kind woman, she said slowly, and I believe she is hiding something. Donovan nodded. Thank you. Agnes hesitated. One more thing, sir. She doesn't cry, not ever. But I've seen her holding that locket she wears around her neck sometimes. And, well, sometimes her eyes seem to go to a place far away, as if she's standing in a room the rest of us cannot see. After Agnes left, Donovan stared at the closed door for a long time. He didn't know if Clara was a puzzle he needed to solve or a wound he kept probing, expecting it to bleed. He left the office and headed toward the staff wing. As he rounded the corner near the sunroom, he saw her. Clara was kneeling in the hallway, picking up a basket of towels that someone had dropped. A little girl, one of the gardener's children, was helping her, and the two of them were laughing softly together. He stepped forward. Clara? She looked up. Yes, Mr. Thorne. I would like to speak with you privately. She nodded. Of course. He led her to the small sitting room at the back of the house. There were no cameras here, no pretense. Just him, her, and the heavy silence between them. When the door closed, he turned to face her. You didn't take the money, he stated. She didn't respond. But you are hiding something. Clara looked at him, her eyes calm, her hands folded in front of her apron. Everyone is hiding something, Mr. Thorne. Some of us just don't have the luxury of pretending it isn't there. Donovan stared at her, the fragments of his assumptions shattering around him. He didn't know whether he admired her or feared her. The sitting room fell into a thick, unmoving silence. Donovan stood by the window, arms crossed, the late afternoon sun striping the floor in bars of gold. Clara remained near the door, composed, her hands clasped loosely in front of her apron. She looked peaceful, far too peaceful for someone who had just been all but accused of being a thief. Donovan cleared his throat. You don't seem surprised that I wanted to speak with you again. Clara offered a gentle shrug. You've been watching me since the day I arrived, sir. I assumed it was only a matter of time. Her candor struck him like a sudden chill. I'm careful about who I allow into my life, she nodded, and I am careful about where I walk. The reply threw him off balance. Most people in her position would have been apologizing, perhaps begging, certainly offering explanations. But she stood her ground, unapologetic, not combative, just steady. You've been employed here for 3 weeks, he said slowly. You've refused all tips. You keep to yourself. You avoid the other staff. I came here to work, she replied simply, not to make friends. Donovan stepped closer. What's in the envelope Agnes saw you with? Clara's eyes didn't flicker. It is a photograph of my son. That stopped him for a moment. The room felt smaller, tighter. He exhaled through his nose. Agnes says you never speak of him. I don't owe anyone my grief, she replied, her voice soft but firm. People enjoy packaging up pain into something neat and tidy. They ask questions they don't truly want the answers to. Donovan tilted his head. Try me. For a long beat she was silent. Then, quietly, she spoke. His name was Leo. He died 3 years ago. An asthma attack. I was working a double shift at the nursing home. I should have been there, but I wasn't. Her voice didn't crack or rise. It was the tone of someone who had cried every tear her body could produce and still had an ocean of grief left over. Donovan didn't speak. I carry his photograph because I don't trust my own memory to recall his face perfectly. And if I forget even one small part of him, then I have failed him twice. Her words hung in the air like incense, painful but sacred. Donovan finally sat, resting his hands on his knees. You are not what I expected. She gave him the smallest of smiles. You aren't either. He studied her. "I'm not looking to be liked, Clara. I'm looking for loyalty. People lie, they steal, they tell you they love you, and then leave you for someone who happens to be wearing your watch." There it was again, the shadow of Sabina. Clara didn't ask for details, she just nodded. "I have seen enough to know that love is not the same as safety." Donovan leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he wasn't trying to catch her in a lie. He was trying to understand the silence she wore like armor. "You know," he said after a while, "the staff mentioned you cried during your interview, not during the questions. You cried when Agnes brought you a cup of tea." Clara looked surprised. "She was kind." "And that made you cry?" "Kindness feels heavier when you are used to carrying blame." Donovan swallowed hard. Her words peeled back something raw inside him. This wasn't about a maid anymore, or a theft, or even Sabina. This was about a mirror. He saw in Clara something he hadn't confronted in himself in years. Guilt disguised as control, pain masquerading as order. He stood up suddenly, needing air. "You can go." Clara nodded, but didn't leave immediately. Instead, she asked quietly, "Did you think I took your money because of where I come from? Because I'm poor?" Donovan froze. He turned to face her, guilt flashing across his features for just a second. "I thought you took it because you were quiet, because I didn't know you. And maybe, yes, maybe a part of me still holds that prejudice." She didn't gloat or scold him. She just looked at him with tired eyes. "People see what they expect to see. I am used to it. But that does not mean it doesn't cut." Donovan felt his throat tighten. Clara stepped back, her hand on the doorknob. "I do not need an apology, Mr. Thorne, but I do need to know where I stand, so I can decide how much of myself I am willing to leave in this house." And with that, she left. Donovan stood alone in the sitting room. The sun was now beginning to fade, shadows climbing the walls like ivy. He looked around at the priceless art, the expensive furniture, the life of meticulous order he had so carefully constructed, and somehow it all felt counterfeit. Later that evening, as the estate quieted for the night, Donovan walked past the staff wing and paused outside Clara's quarters. He didn't knock. He just stood there. From inside, he could hear a faint humming, a lullaby. And for the first time in a very long time, Donovan Thorne didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a man being silently forgiven by someone who owed him absolutely nothing. The next morning, Donovan Thorne found himself standing in front of the mirror longer than usual. His razor hovered just above his jaw, unmoving. The man staring back at him was sharply dressed, yes. A tailored shirt, sleeves rolled precisely to the elbow, but his eyes carried something else. A weight. Guilt, perhaps. Reflection. A crack in the armor. Last night had shaken something loose. Clara's words, "I need to know where I stand," had replayed in his head like a chorus he couldn't silence. They were calm, but they were loaded. Not a demand, not a threat, just truth. And Donovan couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him with such unvarnished honesty. By 8 o'clock he was already in the library, pretending to read a financial report while the scent of polished wood and early sunlight filled the room. His eyes scanned the numbers, but his mind wasn't on business. Gideon knocked gently and poked his head in. "Sir, Miss Sabina asked me to remind you about brunch at the aviary at 11. Donovan nodded. "Tell her I'll meet her there. Alone." Gideon raised a curious eyebrow, but said nothing. "Very good, sir." The door shut again. Donovan exhaled. He had no intention of going to brunch. Instead, he opened his laptop, pulled up the staff files once more, and clicked on Clara's profile. He studied her resume, the volunteer notes, her last listed employer, a nursing home in Gary, Indiana. Her references were impeccable. Nothing stood out. And yet everything about her stood out. Not for being dramatic, but for being exactly the opposite. He clicked over to a background report he had quietly ordered the day before. Everything checked out. No arrests, no civil cases, no outstanding debts. Just one single note of interest. Clara had enrolled in a grief therapy training course last year, but had dropped out halfway through. Donovan stared at the note. That small detail said more than a dozen glowing references ever could. She tried to move on, but couldn't finish. He closed the laptop and stood. It was time to stop hiding behind reports and assumptions. Downstairs he found Clara in the conservatory, gently watering the houseplants. It was an odd job for someone in her role, but she did it with immense care, inspecting leaves, wiping away dust with a soft cloth. She hadn't noticed him. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but steady. She turned. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. Walk with me." She hesitated, then set the watering can aside and wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course." They walked in silence for a while through the back gardens, past the neatly trimmed boxwood hedges, and around the small reflecting pool near the edge of the property. It was a peaceful morning. Sparrows flitted between the branches of the birch trees. Somewhere in the distance, a gardener's leaf blower hummed like background static. "I've been thinking," Donovan began, keeping his hands in his pockets, "about what you said yesterday." She gave a small nod, but said nothing. "I want to ask you something, and I would appreciate an honest answer." "I haven't lied to you, sir." "I know." He paused. "Which is why I believe I can ask." She waited. "Why did you really take this job?" he asked. "You're educated. You could have worked anywhere. Why here?" Clara didn't answer right away. They reached a stone bench near a small fountain, and she gestured for him to sit. When they did, she clasped her hands in her lap, staring at the slow arc of water spraying into the basin. "I needed quiet," she said finally. "The kind of quiet that comes when you are surrounded by someone else's chaos." He frowned. "This place is chaotic." "Controlled chaos," she corrected. "Money, power, image, all of it moving at a frantic pace, but everyone pretending it's perfectly still." Donovan let out a quiet breath. "And that's comforting?" "In a strange way, yes," she admitted. "Because if everything is a performance, I don't have to explain why I'm not okay." Her honesty caught him off guard again. "I lost someone," she added, "and the only way I could continue breathing was to stay in motion. Grief is deafening when you stop." Donovan looked at her. "Leo." She nodded. "You read my file." "I had to be sure." "Of what? That you weren't punishing the wrong person?" Donovan's jaw tightened. He looked at her, his eyes clear and calm. "You're not the first. You won't be the last. But I don't hold grudges. I hold boundaries." The words sank in. "Boundaries?" "Yes, sir." He leaned forward slightly. "And what would it take for you to move yours? Just enough to let someone in?" Her brows knit together, but only slightly. "That would depend on the person." "And if it's me?" For the first time she smiled, not out of politeness, not out of duty. It was small, soft, and real. "Then I would say you have some work to do, Mr. Thorne." He laughed quietly. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a few more minutes. Donovan felt something shift, not just in the conversation, but in the space between them. Trust wasn't built overnight, but this felt like laying the foundation. When they stood to walk back toward the house, Donovan said, "Clara, I am sorry." She looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "I did not give you the benefit of the doubt. I let my history decide your character. That is not how I want to lead." She nodded, the softness in her expression returning. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." They reached the terrace. Before parting ways, Clara added quietly, "And for the record, if I ever needed money, I would ask, not steal." Donovan smiled. "I believe you now." As she disappeared inside, Donovan turned toward the fountain once more. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Donovan Thorne stood alone on the terrace, watching the morning settle like soft ash over the garden. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, his mind wasn't racing. It wasn't calculating, predicting, or defending. It was just quiet. Hope was a dangerous thing, especially for a man who had spent years building walls out of distrust. And yet, he felt it now, small, inconvenient, flickering, but unmistakably there. All because of a quiet maid with more dignity than most people he had ever dined with in boardrooms. He wasn't sure what he was feeling, but he knew this. He wanted to feel more of it. Back inside, he poured himself a second cup of coffee, black and scalding. As he stirred it absently, Gideon stepped into the kitchen with a hesitant knock. "Sir, I have been asked to deliver something." Donovan raised a brow. "Asked by whom?" Gideon held out a sealed envelope. "Miss Sabina." The sight of her name in scripted ink made Donovan's stomach turn. He hadn't spoken to her since yesterday's shallow taunts. There was no warmth in that woman anymore, just performance, vanity, and worse, convenience. He tore open the envelope and scanned the contents quickly. It was a formal request, not for money, but for property. Specifically, a list of jewelry, designer dresses, and a vintage Aston Martin Donovan had gifted her the year before. Her note was handwritten in soft blue ink. "Don't worry, I won't be coming back to the house. I've met someone new, younger, and far less suspicious." There was a lipstick kiss at the bottom. Donovan chuckled, but there was no humor in it, just relief and finality. He folded the note and slid it into the trash. "Anything else?" he asked Gideon. "Yes, sir. There is a call for you, on your private line." Donovan nodded, stepping into his office. The line blinked red, unknown number. He answered. "Thorne." A man's voice came through, cool and professional. "Mr. Thorne, this is Detective Miller, Gary PD. I was told you had requested information regarding Clara Hayes, one of your employees." Donovan froze. "That's right. I looked into the incident involving her son, Leo Hayes." Donovan sat down. "Go on." "The death certificate lists the cause as asthma-induced cardiac arrest. No autopsy was performed, no suspicion of foul play. However," the detective paused, "there is a flagged report from Child Protective Services from 2 weeks before his death." Donovan's grip tightened on the phone. "Flagged for what?" "Neglect. An anonymous caller claimed Clara had been leaving her son unattended for long hours, said the child had been seen alone at the apartment complex." Donovan's heart dropped. The detective continued. "A caseworker visited, found no immediate signs of danger. The case was closed due to a lack of evidence. But the note is still in the file." Donovan sat in silence. The detective cleared his throat. "That is all I found, sir. I thought you should know." "Oh, thank you," Donovan said flatly. He ended the call and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Was it true? Could she have left her son alone? The thought warred with the woman he had come to know, the way she handled pain, the way she avoided pity, the locket, the photograph, the quiet strength. Still, something in his gut turned over. He closed his eyes. "Do not jump to conclusions," he told himself. "You have been wrong before." But doubt had a voice, and it was growing louder. Later that day, Donovan walked the estate grounds, unsettled. He didn't tell Clara what he had learned. Not yet. He needed to see it for himself, to look into her eyes and ask. He found her by the greenhouse, helping Agnes repot a series of orchids. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands dirty with soil, and yet she looked peaceful, grounded, as if the earth itself were her confessional. "Clara," he called gently. She looked up, brushing dirt from her hands. "Yes, sir." "Could we talk? Alone?" Agnes gave Clara a small nod and disappeared inside. Donovan approached, his expression unreadable. "You once told me that grief was heavier when you're used to carrying blame." Clara nodded slowly. He continued, "What if the blame was earned?" She didn't flinch, but her hands curled slightly, instinctively. "I received a call," Donovan said carefully, "from the Gary Police Department. They mentioned a CPS report. They said Leo may have been left alone. Clara inhaled sharply, her first visible break. Donovan softened his tone. I am not accusing you. I just need to know. Clara looked down at the dark soil, at the small, tangled roots in her palm. She took a moment before she spoke. I was working nights, double shifts. I couldn't afford childcare. Leo was 7. He was smart. I thought he could manage. I told him not to open the door for anyone. I left him food, water, his inhalers. I thought, her voice caught, I thought I could stretch myself far enough to be everything at once, but I couldn't. Tears welled in her eyes now, not from guilt, but from raw memory. I came home that morning, and he wasn't breathing. The neighbor said they'd heard him coughing hours before but didn't want to get involved. I held him until the ambulance came, but he was already gone. Donovan's throat closed. Clara wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. So, yes, I left him. I failed him, and I live with that every single day. The silence that followed was thick and terrible. Donovan stepped closer. Why didn't you tell me that? Because you would have judged me just like everyone else. Because in your world, mistakes are sins. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said quietly, and yet I trust you more than I trust most people. Clara looked up, startled. Donovan's gaze softened. I don't know why. I just do. They stood there, two broken souls sharing the same air. And for the first time, Donovan didn't see her as his employee. He saw her as his equal. That night, the estate seemed to breathe with a different rhythm, slower, heavier, as if even the walls had overheard what had passed between Clara and Donovan near the greenhouse. Donovan couldn't sleep. He sat by his bedroom window, a half-empty glass of scotch in hand, staring out at the moonlit grounds. Sabina's room, now stripped of her belongings, was locked and silent, her perfume finally fading. It no longer mattered where she was, but Clara, she was still here. And now he knew the whole truth, not the polished resume, not the whispers from Agnes, or the silence of the security cameras. The truth, raw and unvarnished. She had left her son alone, and she had lost him, and she had never forgiven herself. Neither had he. His own father had died alone, too, on the floor of his penthouse suite, clutching his chest, while Donovan took a conference call in Tokyo. He had always told himself there was nothing he could have done, that it was a matter of time. But deep down, guilt had settled in him like rust. He didn't know if that's why he saw himself in Clara, or why her pain echoed so deeply in his own bones. But he knew this. He no longer saw her as a suspect. He saw her as someone who had survived. The next morning he skipped his meetings. Instead, he spent 2 hours on the phone, transferring one of his foundation's emergency grants to a community center in Gary, Indiana, the same one Clara had once volunteered at. He didn't mention her name. He didn't need the credit. He just wanted the center to be able to expand its child care program. When he emerged from his office, Gideon greeted him with a small nod. Miss Hayes is in the dining room, sir, preparing breakfast with Agnes. Donovan walked there slowly. Inside, Clara stood at the long counter, slicing strawberries, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back neatly. She wore the same calm expression, though her eyes looked lighter. Donovan watched her for a moment before speaking. You always cook on Saturdays? Clara looked up. Only when Agnes lets me. She says my pancakes are better than hers, but I think she just wants a break. Donovan smiled. I'd believe it. He stepped in and grabbed a plate, taking a seat at the far end of the long table while she plated breakfast for the rest of the staff. After a moment, she approached him. Hungry, or just pretending to be civilized? Both, he admitted, but mostly curious. About what? You? She paused. Still trying to read me? No, trying to learn from you. Clara raised an eyebrow. You don't seem like the kind of man who is used to learning from people like me, people like you. Quiet, working class? He didn't deny it. You're right, Donovan said. But you're also wrong. I was raised by a woman, my nanny, Claudette. She was the only person in my life who ever told me when I was being an arrogant little brat. Sounds like my kind of woman. She died before I could thank her, he said, his voice dropping. Properly. I mean, I sent flowers to her funeral, but I never showed up. Clara's expression softened. Do you ever talk to her? Sometimes. In my head. Then you're still thanking her. Donovan stared at her. You make everything sound so simple. No, she said quietly. I just stopped making everything so complicated. She placed a plate in front of him. Pancakes, strawberries, a drizzle of honey. He took a bite. They were perfect. Clara, he said after a moment, what do you want? She blinked. From you? From life? She thought about it. Peace. A small garden. A dog, maybe. No pity. And a place where no one assumes I'm dangerous just because I'm tired. Donovan looked at her carefully. Would you consider working directly for me? Not as a maid, as my household manager. She stared at him, caught off guard. I trust you, he said, and I need someone I can rely on, someone who tells me the truth even when I don't want to hear it. Clara hesitated. Are you sure this isn't about guilt? No, he said. This is about clarity. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, let me think about it. He nodded. As she turned to go, he added, one more thing. She glanced back. I read about your grief counseling work. I made a donation this morning. Quietly. She froze. I didn't do it for points, he said. I just thought, but maybe Leo's memory deserved more than silence. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. She nodded once, the kind of nod that carried more weight than words ever could. When she left the room, Donovan sat alone, staring at the plate she had left for him. Somewhere in his chest, something shifted. It wasn't quite healing, not quite forgiveness, but it was a start. Donovan spent the rest of the morning walking the halls of his estate, a mug of coffee forgotten in his hand. For once the house felt different. It wasn't hollow or staged. It breathed with a quiet life. Agnes humming from the laundry room, the scent of lemon oil from freshly polished floors, the soft rumble of the gardener's tools in the distance. Everything was working, but not for show. And Clara Hayes had something to do with that. He had offered her a role beyond cleaning floors and folding linens, and now, waiting for her answer, made him more nervous than any corporate deal ever had. Because this wasn't about strategy, it was about trust, and she didn't give that easily. In the late afternoon, Donovan sat beneath the shade of the oak trees at the edge of the property, a place he rarely visited unless he needed to think. From here, he could see the old iron gates that frame the front drive, and, beyond that, a glimpse of the world he had spent decades trying to control. Footsteps approached behind him, soft and measured. He didn't turn. You always sit out here when you're waiting, Clara's voice carried gently, the hint of a smile just beneath it. He looked over his shoulder and found her standing with her arms folded, still in her work uniform, but without the apron. I've never waited for anything like this before, he admitted. She took a few steps forward and sat on the bench beside him. Not too close, not too far. The distance of someone still deciding if the ground was safe. You asked me what I wanted, she said after a pause. And I've been thinking about it. Donovan turned toward her. I want to matter, she said plainly, not to be seen out of pity or hired to fill a quota or kept around because I'm convenient. You already matter, Clara. I want it to be for the right reasons, she continued. If I accept this position, I need to know it won't change who I am or how I'm treated. I will not trade my silence for a title. Donovan nodded slowly. I don't want your silence. I want your voice. She looked at him then, and for the first time her guard dipped just slightly. Then yes, she said, I will take the job, but on my terms. Name them. I don't work on Sundays. I don't smile for cameras. And if you ever lie to me, even once, I am gone. Donovan exhaled. Fair enough. They sat in silence again, the breeze moving through the trees above them. Then Clara added, "I also want to hire someone else." Donovan raised a brow. "Excuse me? There is a woman I know, a single mother with 3 children. She works 2 cleaning jobs and takes the night shift at the hospital cafeteria. She is drowning, but she is good. Better than I was when I started." He thought about it. "What's her name?" "Carla Brooks." Donovan pulled out his phone and made a note. "Tell her to come in next week." Clara gave a small, satisfied nod. "Good." A moment passed before Donovan said, "This place, it has been empty for a long time, not physically, but emotionally. People come through, perform their tasks, and leave. And I have allowed that to happen. I built it to keep people out." Clara turned toward him. "Why?" "Because letting people in costs too much." "Not letting them in costs more." He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I buried a son I hadn't fully known," she said softly. "I loved him more than life, but I was always too tired, too focused on surviving, not enough on being." Donovan's voice broke a little. "I think I did the same with my father." They didn't speak for a while. The weight of their confessions settled like soft dust in the quiet. Then Donovan asked, "Can I show you something?" She nodded. He led her through the estate to the western wing, a part of the house rarely used. Behind a locked door was a room Clara had never seen. He pulled a key from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a music room. A grand piano sat in the center, untouched for years. Dust covered the keys like a shroud of silence. Julian stepped inside first. "My father used to play here every Sunday afternoon. He said it was the only time he felt human." Clara looked around, her eyes wide. "Why did you close it?" "After he died, I couldn't bear the sound. Even silence hurt less." She moved to the piano, gently lifting the fallboard. Her fingers hovered over the keys. "Do you play?" Donovan nodded. "Not well." She smiled faintly. "Play anyway." He hesitated. Then he sat and struck a chord, shaky, imperfect. Then another. The music came slowly, uneven at first, but then steadier. Clara stood nearby, her eyes closed, listening, and for the first time since his father's death, Donovan didn't feel like an orphan. He felt like a man reclaiming something he had lost. As the final notes faded, Clara said quietly, "That sound. Your father would be proud." Donovan looked at her. "No," he said. "He would be grateful I finally stopped hiding." She gave a small smile. "That is all any parent wants, to know their child made peace." He closed the lid of the piano gently, and in that stillness, something new was born. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was a partnership, forged not by titles or power, but by pain, by truth, by the rare, quiet courage it took to show up fully in front of another soul. The following week passed like the slow unfolding of spring after a brutal winter. Clara, now household manager, stepped into her new role with quiet authority. She didn't bark orders or micromanage. Instead, she observed, asked the right questions, and listened. The staff, who had once dismissed her as just another temporary maid, now turned to her with questions, and they received answers that were clear, fair, and always rooted in a deep sense of calm. Even Agnes, proud and stubborn, had pulled Clara aside one morning and said, "You have a backbone made of quiet steel. This house needed that." Donovan noticed the difference almost immediately. The estate felt lighter. The staff moved with more ease. The kitchen ran smoother. The garden bloomed under new routines. Even the weekly vendors stopped arriving late. Order had returned, not because Clara demanded it, but because she inspired it. Donovan, meanwhile, found himself adjusting to the new balance of power with unexpected grace. For years he had micromanaged his home the way he managed his boardroom, everything under control, every decision flowing from him. But with Clara, he didn't feel the need. She saw things he didn't, felt the undercurrents of the household with a sensitivity he hadn't realized was missing, and most surprising of all, he trusted her judgment. One evening, Donovan stood in his office, gazing out the tall windows as dusk settled in. He held a tumbler of whiskey, untouched. Across the grounds he saw Clara speaking with Gideon. She was pointing toward the guest house and nodding as Gideon took notes. A week ago he might have felt the need to ask questions. Now he just watched. She had it handled. Later that night, Donovan sat alone in the library. A fire crackled softly behind him. The piano room remained unlocked now, occasionally filled with hesitant chords when he wandered in after dark. Clara entered quietly, holding a file folder. "Got a minute?" "Always," he said, motioning for her to sit. She handed him the folder. "Staff evaluations. I've made a few notes. Nothing dramatic, but I would recommend a reassignment for Charlie in maintenance. He's strong, but his back isn't keeping up with the workload." Donovan flipped through the folder, nodding. "You're thorough. I believe in people doing what they're best at, not just what they're told." He smiled. "Spoken like a leader." Clara tilted her head. "Don't push it." Donovan chuckled. "Fair enough." They shared a moment of comfortable silence, the kind that speaks of mutual respect. Then Clara added more softly, "Carla Brooks starts next Monday. I already arranged her schedule with Agnes." "Good," Donovan said. That was the right call. "I'll be honest, Donovan," she said, using his first name now, not his title. "I never expected this. This trust, this space, a chance to rebuild something of my own." He looked at her carefully. "You've earned it. All of it." She smiled, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "I got a letter from my old landlord back in Gary. It seems someone has been covering my rent for the past 3 months." Donovan's heart skipped a beat. She added, "I never told anyone where I lived, not even on my application here." He set down his glass. "Clara, was it you?" she asked. Not with anger, but with a kind of tired understanding. He nodded. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you were worth the investment." Clara exhaled, her expression unreadable. "You didn't need to do that." "I know." They stared at each other, the fire crackling between them. "You don't owe me a rescue, Donovan," she said quietly. "I am not a project. I am not a redemption arc for someone else's guilt." "I know," he repeated. "I'll pay it back." "You don't have to." "But I will," she insisted. "Because if I don't, then this," she gestured between them, "starts to feel like another transaction. And I need to know that I earned my place here, not just because I passed some test or touched your conscience." Donovan's voice dropped. "You've earned more than that." She stood. "Then let me stand on it, not under it." He nodded, offering no more protests. As she walked toward the door, she paused. "One more thing. There is someone at the gate. Says he knows you." Donovan frowned. "Did he give a name?" "Victor Croft." Donovan stood instantly, the blood draining from his face. Clara narrowed her eyes. "Should I be concerned?" "Yes," Donovan said. "Victor doesn't visit without a reason." She turned to go. "Then I will have Gideon wait nearby." As she left, Donovan felt the quiet in the library shift again. But this time, it was not from peace, but from warning. Victor Croft had been his father's closest friend, and, for a time, Donovan's mentor. But their last conversation, over a decade ago, had ended with threats. If Victor was here, something was coming, and it wasn't going to be quiet. Victor Croft's arrival felt like a thundercloud rolling in on an otherwise bright afternoon. Donovan watched from the front steps as the sleek black Lincoln Town car eased up the gravel driveway, crunching to a halt. The door opened, and Victor stepped out with the kind of presence that announced itself long before words were spoken. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair swept back like a lion in winter, Victor still wore the custom suits and long trench coats he had favored for years. And despite the decades since they'd last spoken, he looked unchanged, except for his eyes. Those were colder. Donovan didn't move. Neither did Victor. "You're grayer," Victor called across the steps, his voice smooth, like bourbon poured slow. "You're Balder," Donovan replied, folding his arms. "Showing up unannounced." Victor climbed the steps with deliberate slowness, glancing once at the cameras perched discreetly on the pillars. "This place looks the same," he muttered. "Still feels like your father's house." Donovan bristled. "It's not." "No?" Victor gave him a long look, then smiled. "Then let's see if you've earned it." Donovan stepped aside but didn't offer a handshake. Victor didn't expect one. Inside, Gideon appeared but paused when Donovan gave him a slight shake of the head. "We'll handle this privately." They walked to the study, leather, mahogany, and the scent of old money. Donovan poured 2 bourbons out of habit, but only took one. Victor didn't touch his. "You're not here to reminisce," Donovan said flatly. "So speak." Victor leaned against the edge of the desk. "I'm here about your father's estate, about something he left unfinished." Donovan narrowed his eyes. "His estate has been settled for years." "Not all of it." Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope, setting it on the desk. He kept certain assets off the books. A trust, tied to a shell company, under a name you'd never recognize unless you knew where to look. Donovan didn't touch it. "And you're just now coming forward?" "I'm coming forward because someone else already has." Victor's voice hardened. "A woman, claiming to have a legal right to it." Donovan froze. "Who?" "Her name is Sabina." Donovan felt the bottom drop out of the room. Victor gave a tight nod. "She's claiming she was your father's companion before you knew her. Says she bore him a child. That's a lie." "Maybe," Victor said, "but she's filed, and the press is sniffing." Donovan ran a hand down his face, his heart thudding. "She was with me. Apparently not just you." He stood suddenly, pacing to the window. "This is absurd. My father wouldn't. He might have. You weren't here, Donovan. Those last few months he was sick, lonely, and angry with you." Donovan turned. "So you're saying he left money to a woman who turned around and seduced his son?" Victor's silence was answer enough. The weight of the betrayal settled like dust in Donovan's lungs. "She's playing the long game," he muttered, "using sentiment and scandal to get what she wants." "She has a lawyer," Victor said, "and she has documentation, old letters, photos. She's already pushed to have the trust reopened." Donovan stared at the envelope on the desk. "Why come to me?" "Because this can still be handled privately, quietly, before it hits the press." "And what's your stake in this?" Victor's expression shifted just enough to show a flicker of something deeper. "Your father trusted me to protect the family name. I am doing that." Donovan looked at him sharply. "Or are you protecting your own name, Victor? Because if this comes out, your fingerprints are all over it too." They stared at each other, the old tension rising like steam. Finally, Victor stood. "You've changed, but not enough." He walked to the door but paused before opening it. "Handle it, Donovan, before it handles you." And then he was gone. Hours later, Donovan stood alone in the piano room, the envelope unopened beside him on the bench. Outside, dusk fell hard and fast, the shadows growing long. He struck a key. It rang flat. Then another, still flat. His fingers trembled. He reached for the envelope, but the door creaked open behind him. "Clara, I saw the car," she said softly. "That was him." He nodded. "Are you okay?" "No." She walked closer, her presence grounding. "Want to talk?" Donovan hesitated. Then, "Sabina is trying to claim part of my father's estate. Says she had his child. That there's a trust he left behind." Clara's eyes widened. "Do you believe her?" "I don't know." His voice cracked. "And that scares me more than anything." She sat beside him. "What will you do?" He looked down at his hands. "I have to fight it. Not just for the money, for the truth, for the family name, for my father." Clara nodded slowly. "Then let's start." He looked at her. She didn't flinch. "You said let's. "Because you are not doing this alone," she said. "You don't have to." Donovan's chest tightened, not with fear, but with something like grace. He nodded once. "Then we start tomorrow." "No," Clara said. "We start tonight." And together they opened the envelope. The contents of the envelope spilled across Donovan's desk like shards of glass, cold, sharp, and dangerous. There were legal documents, a copy of the trust deed bearing his father's signature, and several photographs. Some were clearly aged, showing Sabina with an older man Donovan instantly recognized as Alistair Thorne. They were intimate, though not explicit, his father's arm draped across Sabina's shoulder in one, another showing the two sharing champagne in a private garden Donovan knew all too well. But the final image was the one that chilled him to the bone, a birth certificate. Donovan stared at it, the blood draining from his face. Name: Daniel F. Croft. Mother: Sabina Varsi. Father: Alistair Thorne. He didn't speak. Clara stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. "That is not your signature on any of this." "No," Donovan said, his jaw clenched. "But that is my father's. At least, it looks like it." He pulled out his phone and called his attorney, Elias Vance. The voice on the other end was calm and clipped. "Donovan, it's late. I need a forensic review of a set of documents, including a signature that may belong to my father. Forward them to me. I'll send a courier. I don't want this scanned or floating in the cloud." There was a pause. "Understood. What is going on?" "A potential claim against the Thorne estate, from Sabina Varsi." "Jesus Christ." "Exactly." Donovan hung up and turned to Clara. "I need you to watch Sabina's moves, quietly. If she speaks to any media outlets, any at all, I want to know." Clara gave a slight nod. "You think she is bluffing?" "I think she is dangerous." He grabbed the birth certificate again, holding it up to the light. "And I think this child Daniel, if he exists, he's leverage." Clara walked over, arms folded. "She doesn't just want money, she wants something else." "Control," Donovan said. "She always did. This is her second act." "Then let's steal the stage," Clara said. Donovan glanced at her, surprised by the fire in her tone. Clara met his gaze. "You gave me a second chance, Donovan. Let me help you hold on to what is yours." He nodded slowly. "Then we do this together." The next morning, Clara left the estate early in an unmarked staff vehicle. Donovan had arranged for a private investigator to meet her in a small diner in Evanston, where Sabina had once claimed she grew up. The investigator, a former CIA asset named Finn, was sharp and discreet. Over lukewarm coffee, Clara handed over a copy of the documents and a small list of questions Donovan wanted answered. Find the birth certificate's origin. Is it real? Who signed it? Also, track down this Daniel Croft, where he lives, where he goes to school, if he is even real. Finn nodded. And Sabina? She's playing a long con. If she has media contacts, we want to intercept. Track her social media quietly, no digital footprints. Finn grinned. Like old times. By the time Clara returned to the estate, Donovan was already waiting in the library with his legal team. Vance was pacing. "The documents look real, but we'll know more after handwriting analysis." Donovan sat behind his desk, hands folded. "If they're real and the child is legitimate, then Sabina gets a slice of your father's residual trust if she can prove paternity. Can we stop it? Not if it is true, but we can challenge the trust's terms, delay things, push for DNA." Donovan's jaw tightened. "I will not let her tear this family apart." Clara stood quietly by the fireplace. "What if the child is innocent in all of this?" Donovan looked at her. She didn't back down. "He might be real. He might be a pawn. But if he is your half-brother, Donovan, you will have to decide what you are fighting for, the truth or just control." Donovan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Both. I want the truth."